none of this is new. This is like old school nutrition, like really old school nutrition. In fact, when we opened up Vitality Nutrition in 1977, glandulars were a regular part of what we sold a lot of back then. Like these were big sellers. Now they're big sellers again, but they faded away for a long time, partly because of the vegan and plant-based movement, partly because it just grossed people out, partly because I think there's not a lot of education on it. And that's what this show is about, to try and help you get educated on why these can make sense. Now, it's important to understand that glandulars, while they do come from a cow in most cases, are not just about protein, like a protein powder would be. You could find beef protein, you can find beef bone broth protein, you can find whey protein. That's where you're going to get the high protein. Yes, there's protein in glandulars, but that's not why we're eating these. But we are eating them for some of the amino acid peptides that are found in them. And of course, peptides are another big word in this. We're going to get into that in a while as well. Welcome to Vitality Radio, the podcast that helps you make sense of natural supplements and thrive without pharma drugs. I'm Jared St. Clair. I grew up in a health food store and spent over 40 years now figuring out what works and what doesn't, so that you can make confident, informed decisions about nutrition, supplements, and your health. Hello and welcome to Vitality Radio. I'm your host. My name is Jared St. Clair, and today we're going to start a new series. It's going to be a short series, probably 4 or 5 episodes, but I think it's an important one because it's one I get a lot of questions about. We're calling it Ancestral Nutrition, and specifically today we're going to talk about glandular supplements. And this is like Glandulars 101. And when I say glandulars, you've heard of like beef liver supplements, or maybe you've heard of multi-glandular supplements. I've got one here called beef organ nutrients. I got another one here called 7 bovine organs, beef organ complex. And I've got, Just Ingredients has one. Ancient Nutrition has one. There's a bunch of different ones out there. And there's a brand out there called Ancestral that has one. Another one, Paul Saladino talks about them. They're hot right now, like really, really hot right now. And if you've been paying attention to supplements, listening to podcasts like this one, then you've heard about them. Now, I wonder if you've tried them. I've actually been very curious. If you're watching us on YouTube, leave a comment on YouTube if you've actually tried these. And if you have, if you've noticed any benefits from them or what you've noticed from them, it'd be super helpful. You can also leave those comments on the Spotify feed if you'd like. But I would dare guess anyway, just based on my interactions with, hundreds of customers here at Vitality Nutrition every single month, that you're probably in the majority of people that has never tried one of these, even though you've heard of them, because maybe you don't quite know where to start. And that's what this episode's all about. Now, we're going to have, like I say, maybe 5 or 6 episodes. And this one is all about glandulars, what they are, these organ supplements, why they are, and why you might want to consider them in the first place. Then we're going to talk specifically about liver, because liver is the big one. It's the one that everybody talks about the most, definitely the most popular of these options. We're going to talk about men's health and how men's organ supplements can work specifically for the male anatomy. We can talk about women's health, the same thing on that side. And if this becomes a popular series and you want it, I'll even talk about the HPA axis, hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis, thyroid, how that all plays into glandulars. And we may even get into non-glandular stuff that's still ancestral nutrition, like colostrum and things like that. So anyway, today we're getting into glandulars, and we're going to talk about specifically what glandulars are, and then we'll get into more details as we go. And at the end of this show, I'll talk about individual glands and why they matter. But let's start with the simplest question. What is a glandular supplement? It's a dried, ground, and then usually encapsulated. Sometimes it's in powder, but more often than not, animal organ or gland. That's it. In most of the products we're going to talk about in this series, and specifically the ones that I carry, we're talking about beef, bovine organs, cattle. And the freeze-dried part, which I'll get into in detail later, is critical because the how of the drying process changes everything about what you're actually getting. And I would anticipate that if you've been listening to some of the carnivore people, Paul Saladinos of the world, these types of folks, then you've heard about, nose to tail, and you've maybe even considered eating glands like liver and heart and things like that, but it grosses most people out. And frankly, it's an acquired taste if you've ever tried this stuff. So the capsules can make a lot of sense because they're concentrated. You certainly don't have to taste them, and you can still get really good quality stuff. And so let's talk about, kind of the main glands that are often found in these supplements: heart, kidney, spleen. I mentioned liver, of course, pancreas, adrenal glands. These are kind of the big ones. If we get into the women's and men's, you'll sometimes see prostate in men's formulas, ovary in the women's formulas, and sometimes you'll even see desiccated brain tissue. All of this sounds weird to a lot of people. But what's interesting is none of this is new. This is like old school nutrition, like really old school nutrition. In fact, when we opened up Vitality Nutrition in 1977, glandulars were a regular part of what we sold a lot of back then. Like these were big sellers. Now they're big sellers again, but they faded away for a long time, partly because of the vegan and plant-based movement, partly because it just grossed people out, partly because I think there's not a lot of education on it. And that's what this show is about, to try and help you get educated on why these can make sense. Now, it's important to understand that glandulars, while they do come from a cow in most cases, are not just about protein like a protein powder would be. You could find beef protein, you can find beef bone broth protein, you can find whey protein. That's where you're going to get the high protein. Yes, there's protein in glandulars, but that's not why we're eating these. But we are eating them for some of the amino acid peptides that are found in them. And of course, peptides are another big word in this. We're going to get into that in a while as well. But again, this is not new. This is ancient. Ancient Chinese medicine used organ-based preparations for thousands of years. Indigenous cultures around the world ate nose to tail instinctively. The organs were not leftover parts. They were primary parts, the prize of the kill in many cases. The liver, the heart, the kidneys, these were given to the hunters after a successful kill in many cultures, not the muscle meat. That's a really important cultural data point that I think we've completely lost in modern Western medicine. Our great grandparents even ate tongue, kidneys, liver. I'll always remember when my grandpa and grandma invited me over to have liver and onions, and I tried it, and I said, holy cow, that's the worst thing I've ever put in my mouth. And yes, I did say holy cow. But anyway, regardless of all that, it's just kind of gotten out of favor over the last, 80, 90 years or so. And now it's coming back. Is that a good thing? Well, let's talk about it. Because in modern Western medicine, there is a formal term called organotherapy. It goes back to 1889 when a physician named Dr. Brown Sequard famously self-injected, testicular extract and reported significant improvements in his own vitality at age 72, by the way. Now, the method was crude. The research design was essentially non-existent by today's standards, but it created a wave of both interest and, frankly, mockery. But the underlying observation that organ tissue contains compounds that influence the same tissue in the body turned out to be a thread worth pulling. And over the following decades, physicians and researchers did pull on that thread. By the mid-20th century, a formulator named Dr. Royal Lee and a company called Standard Process, which you may have heard of. They're a big brand out there, sold in physicians, mostly functional medicine physicians and chiropractors' offices and things like that. They built an entire line of glandular-based products, dozens and dozens and dozens of them, that are foundational in naturopathic and functional medicine in many doctors' offices across the country. Many of these products are still in use today. The tradition of glandular therapy did not disappear. It just went underground into functional medicine circles, while conventional medicine moved towards pharmaceuticals, of course. So why does this even make sense? And we have to go back to something known as the principle of like treats like, or the law of similars. Now, you may be familiar with this with homeopathy, but it also applies to organs. Because like supports like is basically the principle that if you are to eat heart, it helps to support your heart. If you eat liver, it helps to support your liver. If you eat adrenal, it helps to support your adrenal glands, and so on. And now, when I say it that way, I understand it can sound somewhat primitive, like something out of ancient folklore or folk medicine. And it is, like I said, very ancient, but those ancient systems got there by observation and paying attention to what worked, not by biochemistry and microscopes and lab coats. The biological rationale has several layers to it. The first one, though, is really important, and the second one, I think, is a little more nuanced, but really, really cool, and probably the part that I like the most. First, there's nutritional layer. The nutrients that are most concentrated in any given organ tend to be the ones that the organ needs most to function. Your heart tissue is extraordinarily rich in CoQ10 and carnitine because at the scale that it needs to have a lot of those nutrients there. Your liver is packed with vitamin B12 and heme iron and choline because those are the building blocks that the liver uses to do its job. So when you consume heart tissue, you're getting a very concentrated delivery of exactly the nutrients that support heart function. That part is not controversial. That's just basic nutritional biochemistry. The second layer, as I said, more nuanced. And this is the part that I personally find the most compelling. Beyond just vitamins and minerals, organ tissue contains what we call organ specific peptides. I told you that word would be coming back. These are small protein fragments that are native to the specific tissue in the animal and in humans. And the research on what happens to these peptides when you consume them orally is where things have gotten pretty interesting over the last few decades. The conventional wisdom used to be that all proteins are simply broken down in digestion and the peptide structure doesn't survive intact. That's largely true for large proteins. But what researchers began finding, particularly through work done in the 1980s and in the 90s, is that smaller peptides can survive digestion, at least partially, enter circulation, and interact with tissues in the body. The concept of food-derived bioactive peptides is now a legitimate and growing area of nutritional research. There are published studies from research institutions, including work at major European universities in the 90s and 2000s, confirming that these small peptides can have real biological activity in the body. And when I say like supports like, what I'm really saying is organ tissue contains organ-specific peptides, cofactors, and signaling compounds, and when consumed and at least partially absorbed, may support analogous tissues in your body. That's the mechanism. And it's not anything but scientific. It's actual biochemistry. So, what actually is in these glands? Well, let's go through them individually. Liver is the nutrient density champion of the animal kingdom. It's the one that is definitely the most popular of all the glandulars, and that is because it is so loaded with nutrition. Liver contains more B12 per ounce than any other known food on earth. Not even close. It's extraordinarily rich in heme iron, the most bioavailable form of iron that exists, far more bioavailable than any plant source or synthetic source. It's loaded with preformed vitamin A, which is retinol, not beta carotene, actual retinol, which is the form the body can use directly. It's a significant source of CoQ10, choline, copper, folate, and the full vitamin B complex. When you hear people say organ meats are the most nutrient dense food on earth, what we're mostly talking about is liver. And I'm going to do a whole episode on that. It'll be the next one in this series. Heart, as I said, is where CoQ10 lives in food. If you've ever taken CoQ10 as a supplement, if you're in your 40s or 50s and you haven't, then we should talk because it's a really important one. But you should know about the fact that this compound is powerful for cellular energy, cardiovascular wellness, and specifically mitochondrial production. And the heart is the most metabolically demanding muscle in the body. It never rests and it concentrates CoQ10 accordingly. Beef heart is the most concentrated food source of CoQ10 that exists. Heart is also rich in carnitine, which shuttles fatty acids into the mitochondria to be burned for fuel, and taurine, which is essential for cardiovascular and neurological function. Kidney brings a high level of selenium, which is one of the most important trace minerals for thyroid function and antioxidant defense. It's also rich in riboflavin, vitamin B2, and B12. Adrenal glands are fascinating. The adrenal gland has the highest concentration of vitamin C of any tissue in the human body, and it's the same in beef adrenal tissue. That's not a coincidence. Vitamin C is essential for the production of cortisol and the catecholamines, your stress hormones. The adrenal glands burn through vitamin C under stress, which is one reason why chronically stressed people need dramatically more vitamin C than what the RDA suggests. Adrenal glandulars also contain adrenal-specific peptides that have been studied for their role in adrenal support. And then the spleen. There's some really interesting research on spleen. It's where the immune system conversation gets Really cool. The spleen contains a small peptide called tufsin, that's Tuftin, which was actually isolated and identified by researchers at Tufts University, thus the name, all the way back in the 1970s. Tufsin is a naturally occurring immune modulating peptide that is found specifically in spleen tissue. It's been studied for its role in supporting immune cell activity, and you can't get that from a multivitamin. You can't get it from vitamin C, but you can get it in bovine spleen. And then there's pancreas, which brings digestive enzyme cofactors to help with digestion of your meals, and peptides that support pancreatic function, which can help with all things pancreas, meaning blood sugar, A1C, supporting insulin sensitivity, and so on. So when you tie all this together, these individual glands and organs clearly can benefit the glands and organs that we have in our human body. Now, I get a question from time to time, are they bioidentical? And the answer is no, they're not exactly the same. Cows aren't humans, humans aren't cows. However, in 2009, a bovine genome was fully sequenced and published. And what that research revealed is that the cattle genome shares significant structural similarity with the human genome, more similarity than people ever expected. The proteins and peptides in bovine organs, particularly the ones involved in core metabolic and physiological functions, tend to be highly conserved across mammals. What does that mean, conserved? I mean, the structure didn't change much across evolutionary time because it couldn't. The function is too critical. Your heart has to do the same basic job as a cow's heart. Your liver has to do the same basic job as the cow's liver, and so on. We're not trying to replace your organs or their output. What we're trying to transplant is the nutrition from that organ into the human body, not the organ itself. We're trying to provide this highly concentrated, biologically coherent nutrition and signaling compounds that support the body's own processes. The distinction matters. A beef adrenal supplement is not your adrenal gland in a capsule. It is the delivery vehicle for the nutrients, peptides, and cofactors that your adrenal glands need to function optimally. That framing is probably the most accurate way I can put it. And I think one of the most compelling reasons why we may want to consider glandulars as part of our nutrition story. Now, how they're made matters a lot. We want freeze dried or desiccated, which is a cold process. Okay. Most are on the market, but if you see them that aren't, avoid them for sure. Freeze drying just means that the organ tissue is frozen first and then placed in a vacuum chamber where moisture is removed without ever applying heat. The result is a stable powder that retains the biological profile of the raw tissue. Why does this matter? Because compounds we care about most in the glandular tissue, the enzymes, the smaller peptides, the heat-sensitive cofactors, can be destroyed by heat. When you cook liver, the B12 and iron survive reasonably well, but the enzymes are denatured and the more delicate peptides and signaling compounds are degraded. Cooked liver is still an exceptional food, but it is a different product than freeze-dried liver tissue. That distinction is the whole point behind these types of nutrients in a capsule form. And then the last thing I'm going to tell you is get it from New Zealand. The 4 brands I'm the most confident in are Just Ingredients, Left Coast Nutrition, a newer brand to us, but a brand that I trust based on their parent company that I know well, Vita Authority, another excellent brand, and Ancient Nutrition. These are all New Zealand sourced, and that matters a lot because you've probably already heard about New Zealand whey protein and why that matters. It's the exact same thing. How they're raised there is different than how they're raised here. If it doesn't say New Zealand or at least Australia, which has pretty much the same code in terms of ethical treatment of how these animals are raised, then it is not what you want. You want it from New Zealand or Australia. You want it freeze dried or also known as desiccated. It's a little bit different, but basically the same. That's what you're looking for. Okay, so who should consider these? That's a little bit tough because I can say this: if you've got low iron or low ferritin levels and you want to supplement it makes a lot of sense to supplement beef liver because it's a heme source of iron and you get that retinol source of vitamin A, which is critical for the uptake of iron. Aside from that, though, you can look at these as multivitamins. We have people that ask, is this a multivitamin, these multiglandulars? To some degree, yes, you can kind of look at them that way. Now, would you take them in addition to a multivitamin? You certainly could. You can experiment with that, see how your body feels. How does your body react? What does it do for you? Obviously, I'm very partial to the Ultimate Vitality Multi. It's my formula. It's a fantastic formula. I'm in love with it. I recommend it all the time. But that doesn't mean that a whole food source nutrient like a glandular supplement might not be the right answer for you. Definitely worth looking at. And if you're looking to just get more nutrition, maybe you're one of these people who says, you know what? I eat pretty clean, but I don't always feel like I'm getting everything that I need in my nutrition. Maybe I'm not getting, a wide range of nutrients from a wide range of different sources. Then glandular supplements can make a lot of sense. If you're someone over 35 who's looking to support energy, immune system, hormonal balance, or overall stress resilience, and you're not currently eating liver, heart, and kidney, which is probably all of you or almost all of you, then this is something you could consider as well. And if you're not sure where to start, like I say, liver, the most dense source of nutrients. You can do a little bit of homework on this and decide, or a multiglandular, which has liver in it, but also has some of these other glands, can make a lot of sense. All right. So this has been Glandulars 101. I would love your feedback on this. Comments on the YouTube show, if you're listening and watching over there, on Spotify are really, really helpful. I'm going to bring you these other ones, the one on liver, the one on women's health, the one on men's health for sure. If these are shows that are well received that you like and you want me to do more, I'll go even deeper on them, but I do need to hear from you. If you have questions, call us 801-292-6662. If you want to jump online, vitalitynutrition.com, or if you want to visit us in person in Bountiful or now South Ogden at Vitality Nutrition, we'd love to have you there. And if I can ask you a favor, if you've lasted this long into the show, if you've used any of our products and you've yet to leave a review on our website, would you do that for us? We have a lot of people asking us about, what are people's experience with these products? And we have quite a few reviews now, but not nearly as many as we could use. If you're a lover of one of our formulas and you love what we're doing here and what I'm doing here on Vitality Radio, we could really use that extra support from you. I would appreciate it very, very much. Thank you so much for joining me. I'm Jared St. Clair, and this has been Vitality Radio. Thanks for listening to the Vitality Radio podcast. If this episode helped you, follow the show, share it with someone, and explore trusted education and resources at vitalitynutrition.com. See you next time.
Hello, everyone. I hope you enjoyed this week's episode of Vitality Radio. Just a reminder that this podcast is for educational purposes only. This podcast has not been evaluated by the FDA. This podcast is provided with the understanding that the information shared is not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease. This podcast is not a substitute for professional care by a medical professional. Thank you.